Welcome to Property Pulse, your trusted guide into making smart real estate decision. I am your host, Udodiri Elizabeth from Keller Williams. So today we're going to be discussing an aspect of real estate that is very interesting. The legal basis of buying, selling, and investing in real estate. And today we have a real estate lawyer who is practicing in Manitoba. Her name is Obaro Efe. Obaro, please can you introduce your name, please? I don't want to
Thank-
misspell or missay your name.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Elizabeth. Thanks for having me. My name is Obaro Efetobore. I am a real estate lawyer in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So, generally, I help clients navigate real estate transactions, such as purchasing their homes, selling their homes, even refinancing their mortgages. I also provide them with the legal advice and guidance they need to close their real estate transaction smoothly and on time.
Thank you for doing that. And where do you practice? What office do you practice from?
Oh, I work with Ogo Law Office, a law firm in Winnipeg, Manitoba here.
Do you have like a social media phone number? If you could also provide those contact details so that any one of us that pick interest, we can always know how to reach out to you.
Okay, I will be happy to provide that. So I am on LinkedIn with my name Obaro Efetobore, and you could also reach me via my email address, which is hannahlegal5@gmail.com. If you want it again, maybe when our listeners come into the program towards the end, I could also tell them again for those that are yet to join. So you can
Thank
catch me
you.
on my LinkedIn handle and also via my email address.
Beautiful. So we're going to dive into the questions we have. And please, if along the line we are, having this discussion and you have any question that you would like to ask our guests, it's okay for you to just raise your hand. And then after she finishes whatever thing she's saying, or I finish whatever thing I'm saying, then you can ask. This is an interactive session. We want to make it interactive whereby we all come here to discuss and learn. So now, the first question. Why is it important to understand the legal side of real estate?
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Just before I start, I just want to put it out there to let our listeners know that today's podcast is for general information purposes only in terms of the basics of real estate. It is no way intended to be legal advice. I believe that everyone's situation is different, so you should always contact a lawyer if you have a real estate situation. With that being said, Elizabeth, I will dive right into your question. Uh, I would like to start by saying that when we talk about the legal side of real estate, we are basically talking about those laws and those processes as well as those documentation that need to be done for a real estate transaction to be successful. We are talking about the land laws. We're talking about the steps you need to go through in terms of getting a lawyer, getting a realtor, and also the paperwork you need to go through, the documents you need to submit in order for you to successfully close a real estate deal, either as a buyer or a seller. So I will be saying that it is important for everyone, the general public, whether you're a buyer or a seller, to understand the legal side of real estate because first, it kind of demystifies the process for you. You would all agree with me that something you don't know looks very vague and big to you. You are ignorant of it, but the moment you begin to acquire knowledge on that topic, you demystify it, it becomes simple. So the most important point why everyone should understand the legal side of real estate is it makes things easier for you. And I believe at the end of today's podcast, our listeners, at least they will have a good amount of information regarding how to conclude real estate transaction. Another reason I think it is important to know the legal side of real estate is that it keeps you compliant. If you know the laws, you know not to break them. If you know what you need to do as a buyer, you know not to break the laws. If you know what you need to do as a seller, it's easier for you. And in the end, it helps you it prevents you from making certain mistakes when you are concluding your transaction. As a buyer, you know what you need to do. You don't get to make those mistakes that will cost you financial or legal consequences. For example, someone could buy a house, and after closing, you discover that there's a fault with the house. However, if you had known this legal side of real estate, if you had worked with a lawyer, if you had worked with a realtor, you will not be experiencing this kind of mistake. So I would say that knowing the legal side gives people guidance and makes them able to make an informed decisions regarding their real estate transactions.
Okay. Thank you. Now, the second question. What are the key legal steps in buying a property?
Okay, so basically, I would say there are several steps to buying a property, but I will just talk about the key legal steps. So I believe the first step will be to first decide on what you want to buy. You know, you can decide to build from the scratch, that's buy a new home, or you can decide to buy an old home, which we call the resale. So either decision you make, you have to decide that first. Am I buying from the scratch? Am I getting an old home? So the first step after that is to engage a realtor. This is where our host Elizabeth comes in. You engage a realtor, and I know realtors usually help with, if you're the seller, you put the property out there. You tell your realtor the kind of property you need to buy, and your realtor gets to work to do the market search and the paperwork for you to get that property. I know some people don't use realtors, especially when they know the person personally. However, most of the cases we've dealt with, a realtor is usually involved. So I believe the second step after this will be, as the realtor gets to work trying to sort out houses for you, you as the buyer, you should get to work and meet with your financial institutions. So when you're buying a house, some people pay cash, but what we see happen often is most people take mortgages from the bank. So this is the stage where you meet your bank for them to pre-approve you for a certain amount for a mortgage, the money with which you need to buy the property. So it is at this stage you consult the bank earlier enough, because this stage takes a lot of time to pull through. So the next steps will be to make an offer to the seller. So after the realtor has looked for the house you intend to buy, you make with the realtor's help, you make an offer to the seller that this is what you want to pay for the house, and I want to buy your house. So it is left for the seller to either accept your offer, make a counter offer, or reject your offer. So if the seller accepts your offer, you get to sign the offer to purchase contract, which is the most important part of the real estate transaction. So here you get to go through the contract, ensure all the terms are clear, ensure that everything, the purchase price and everything is okay by you and is okay with the seller. And this is where you also decide on the possession date. The possession date is simply the date the buyer gets to move into the house, and this date is very important. So if the seller and the buyer checks through the contract, everything looks good, then the buyer signs and the seller signs. After this, the next step will be to consult the lawyer. This is where we come in to help you close that deal. So when you consult your lawyer, the duty of the lawyer is to help you handle the legal side of the transaction. And we usually start this by connecting with the bank to make sure that the funds you need to buy that property gets to the seller on the possession date. So while the lawyer is liaising with the bank to get those funds out, the lawyer goes ahead to conduct due diligence. Due diligence is simply a way to verify the title of the seller. So the seller puts the house out there to say, okay, I want to sell my property. But it's left for the buyer's lawyer to really verify, to make sure that the seller has the right to sell that property, and to make sure there are there are no debts and there are no other defects on the property, which will cause problems for the buyer later. So while the lawyer does this, at this time is also liaising with the bank. Then the lawyer proceeds to prepare the closing documents. So these are simply documents that the buyer and the seller needs to sign in order for the transaction to close successfully. So examples of this document could be the mortgage, it could be the transfer, because the seller has to transfer title to the buyer. So the lawyer prepares the mortgage in line with what the bank instructs. Then the seller also prepares the transfer. Both parties sign. It is also at this stage that the buyer's lawyer and the seller's lawyer exchange trust letters, exchange conditions, just to make sure everything looks good. So at this point, the lawyer also asks for some documents like ID verification from the buyers as well, just to make sure their identity is in place and everything is on point. So after this step is the closing day. The closing day is the most exciting day for buyers, and it's also the most stressful day for them as well, because I know the anxiety, the tension, and the stress, and also the excitement that comes with buying a new home. So on the closing day, the funds must have been ready. The bank transfers the funds to the lawyer transfers the funds to the seller's lawyer. One thing that is important to note at this point is that money does not really change hand between the buyer and the seller directly in transactions. So the money always comes from the bank to the lawyer and from the lawyer to the seller's lawyer. So that is how most of it basically works. So on the closing day, the money is sent to the seller, and if the seller checks that everything looks good, they release the key to the buyer's lawyer, and the buyer's lawyer gives the key to the buyer, and the buyer moves into their new home and enjoy. And the last stage is the post-closing stage. This is just the stage where the lawyer goes ahead to register the buyer as the new owner. Initially, it was the seller giving title to the buyer, so it doesn't end there. The lawyer still has to proceed to the titles registry and ensure to register the buyer as the new owner. So with all the steps in place, this is just the basic thing that happens with closing a real estate transaction.
Wow. Thank you for analyzing the steps, because while you're talking about those steps, I could remember, transactions that I've done. All those steps were all in place. We cannot miss any step.
All steps are crucial.
Exactly. In as much as buying of property in Manitoba is concerned, and even in Canada,
Yes.
no step is allowed to be missed.
Yes.
Yeah. Closing day is a day where, of course, there's a lot of tension.
That's
I know I
correct.
get calls sometimes. Your client has not signed this document. They have to come and sign this document. Me, I have to start calling my client to check with them. Can you go to the lawyer's office? You need to sit down with the lawyer and, take care of some of your documents. Then they can hand over your documents to you with the key.
Yes.
I don't get the key directly, but I make sure my client and the lawyer meet to see that all handover is done according to due diligence.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, the next question. What are common clauses in real estate contracts?
Okay. Basically, there are lots of clauses in a real estate contract, but I would like to mention four common clauses, that's four crucial clauses in a real estate contract. So clauses basically are just paragraphs and terms in the real estate contracts, just so our listeners can understand. Clauses are just those paragraphs with subheadings in your real estate contracts.
So it's more like a language,
Yes,
right?
it's more like it's more like a term.
A terms,
When
yes.
simple term is like a paragraph, the contract is in paragraphs and paragraphs. So
Yes.
they are just terms that stipulate different things in the contract. So I will just highlight four clauses that I believe everyone should understand. The first one will be the price and deposit clause. So this is simply the clause or the paragraph that tells us how much the buyer is paying for the property, how much the seller is selling it for. It also tells us if the buyer is paying cash or if the buyer will be taking a mortgage from the bank to pay for the property. And this clause is crucial or is important because it shows the buyer's financial commitment to the deal. For example, if I want to buy a property, I cannot just make that offer. I have to put something down. So this is where the deposit comes in. This is the clause where you see the amount the buyer is depositing to say, I am committed to buying your property. Please do not show it to anyone else for this certain amount of time. I'm depositing this $10,000. I'm depositing this $20,000 just to show my commitment that I am serious about this transaction. So this is a very important clause in offers to purchase. The second clause would be the closing date clause. Like I said, the closing date is a very important date for the seller and the buyer alike. Why I believe is important is because it helps both parties to avoid any confusion as to when their responsibility starts. So usually in real estate transactions, the closing date is where things such as the taxes and the insurance for the buyer kicks in. So this clause is crucial because it shows the buyer when their responsibility starts and when the responsibility shifts from the seller. So in practice, anything that happens to the property, any risk before the possession date stays with the seller. But anything that happens from the possession date shifts to the buyer. So it is important for both parties to know which date I am taking on responsibilities so as there is no confusion. The third and most important clause I would say is the condition clause. I can't stress this enough. So condition clauses is just the clauses that contains certain conditions. It just basically says this contract will fail, this contract will terminate unless these conditions are fulfilled. So this is where buyers have to really scrutinize and look at it. So the two basic conditions under this clause are the finance condition and inspection condition. So this is an important clause because this is where the buyer can say, hey, I intend to take a mortgage from the bank to pay for this property, but the bank has not given me the money yet. So I am putting the condition that if the bank doesn't give me that money, I'm allowed to back out of the contract. It does not have any consequences. So it is important to add this clause because it will protect you in the future. The other one is the inspection clause. This clause is just simply saying that I want to buy a property, but I need someone to check it out first to make sure it is in a good condition. If my person checks it out and sees that it is not in a good condition, I'm allowed to back out of this transaction without any damages, without any penalties as well. So why this clause is important, in fact, this is the most important part of the whole contract. Because generally speaking, if you make an offer to the seller and you just back out for no reason, the seller has the right to sue you for damages because the seller had put the property out there and probably taking away other prospective buyers to say, okay, I'm committing my property to you. So you can't just wake up and leave. You need good reasons. So this is where you put the condition in place to say, if I don't get this, I'm allowed to back out. So the last one will be the seller's representation and warranty clause. This clause is just simply saying the seller is telling you that my property is good. I have the right to sell this property to you. My property has a clear title and is free from any debt. This is also the clause where the seller says, if there's anything wrong with the property, this is where the seller discloses it and says to the buyer, hey, I have a leaking basement. There's a problem with this house, but we can work things out. This clause is important because the buyer needs to pay attention to know the condition of the house, to know that this is the condition of the house and this is the price I am paying for it. So overall, I believe this is one of the 4 most important clauses the buyers should look out for when signing a contract. I know there are lots of clauses and there's a tendency to get caught up in the pages, but these clauses are crucial to successfully close any real estate transaction.
Wow, this is another analysis that you have actually explained, the contract itself and understanding what certain terms or clauses says, because it's not just signing a document. Understanding what that document is saying is very, 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 very important. I've actually, written contracts where I have to sit down with my clients and explain every one of them. Of course, I have done my own part, but a lawyer would also do their own part as well to make sure that at the end of the transaction, the seller is doing the right stuff and the buyer as well to understand everything that is going on and what they are actually signing. You cannot sign a contract of 20 to 25 years, 30 years, and there is a mistake at
Yes.
the initial stage. So we want to avoid that. And this is one of the reasons why we are organizing events or series like this or podcasts like this rather. We
Yes.
want people to be educated. Let them know this thing. As far as Canada is concerned, there is a way property is being purchased here or sold or invested. So it's very important we take all these measures seriously. So now we're going to go to the next question. Now, my question goes like this. What should buyer look out for in a purchase agreement?
Okay, so I believe there are several things a buyer should look out for, like earlier stated, but most importantly, buyers should understand the clauses in the contract. I can't stress this enough. Like you earlier said, read that contract through and through. Make sure you understand what each of the clauses are telling you. If you do not understand, call your realtor, reach out to your lawyer to explain these clauses to you because it's a contract. This is where Elizabeth, our host, comes in. She's a professional realtor and she's very good at what she does. So, this is where you engage her and you let her know, hey, I don't understand this clause. Could you explain this to me? And she will gladly do that. You must also know that there are conditions, and I know I keep sounding the conditions because it's actually important. So there are conditions in that contract that you must be mindful of, like I said, the inspection and the finance. And you must also know that these conditions are not open-ended. They come with a timeline. I give you an example. A contract condition might say that the buyer is allowed to back out of this deal if they do not get financing from their bank on, say, April 30th. So the buyer does not just go home and sleep. The buyer has to work with this date. The buyer has to be on the neck of his bank to make sure he gets his mortgage approved before that date. So buyers should be mindful that these conditions that they put in place have timelines. And if that timeline elapses and he doesn't waive that condition or let the seller know, then he's in trouble. So the seller can force him. In the end, he will be forced to proceed with the contract where he doesn't even have the money to close. And where he doesn't have the money to close without a cogent excuse, the seller has every right under the law to seek legal action against him. One of which would be to he forfeits the deposit. So buyers have to be mindful of that. Also, the buyer has to know what the seller is saying. The seller is saying, this is my property. It is in good condition. The buyer needs to know that the property is actually in good condition. And the buyer also needs to know that there are no defects with the property. Another thing the buyer should look out for in the purchase agreement are inclusions and appliances. There's a certain clause that describes the property, especially for resale homes, like for old homes. Sometimes buyers or sellers assume. Maybe that clause could say that the stuff such as the stove, the fridge, the dishwashers would not or would be included with this purchase. So sometimes some people just assume that because in rented apartment you have the fridge, you have the stove, they assume that when they are buying a property, it also comes with these things. So this is where you look and you see what the property is coming with. Is it coming with a stove? Is it coming with a dishwasher? Is it coming with a fridge? So this is where you look at it so that there's no confusion as to what is and what is not there. So overall, I would say ask your lawyer or realtor for clear explanation of the clauses before you sign any contract, because once you sign, it is legally binding.
Thank you for saying that. You know why I say thank you? Because you just made me also remember a deal I just closed not too long ago. I would say this month. Well, we actually did had a closing date, but for some reason the client was not prepared. I would say she didn't really have those knowledge. Of course, she was told, but she did not understand. And I would say she did not even prepare her finance. So the closing date was extended, and guess what happened? Interest was not added to the
Yes,
closing costs.
that's what
In fact,
happened.
I had to call her at some point. I said, "Remember, I told you this, I told you that, and you said you understood." So if you don't understand, it is very important to speak with your realtor and ask very, very good question. In fact, me, I always advise all my clients, I always advise even our listeners, before you even talk about buying a house, make sure you are pre-approved. There is no issue on the mortgage side. Everything is clear. Your marital status is important. If you are separated, you state it, I'm separated. If you're divorced, state it, I'm divorced. If you're married, because they went as far as even talking about the status. She has to start providing some certain document to prove this, prove that, prove that. You have to be as open to some extent with your professionals that are working with you, because these are team or a group of people that work as a team to make this thing work. So everybody needs to get the same information. Nothing needs to change. Everything has to be the same, because once something change, then it gives your lender that fear, was they start asking too many questions. That's part of what stretches your closing, and some of all what my Obaro just said. So thank you for also sharing with us this. Now my next question goes like this: what are some of the common legal mistakes people make in real estate transaction?
Thank
Because
you. This is
I've actually encountered lots of mistakes,
mhm.
and to be honest, sometimes when you try to educate people about it, they don't understand. They look at you, oh, she's a realtor, she's not a lawyer. But we want to hear from a lawyer. The law, please tell us.
Okay. This is actually an interesting question. So, from experience, I one common mistake I would say, especially buyers make, is not fully understanding the contract. I say this in terms of the clauses and the conditions of the contract. So I give you an example. There are certain clauses and conditions of the contract. It's either you accept these conditions, like the financing I explained, or you can choose to waive them. So while you're signing the contract, you could say, okay, if I don't get financing from a bank, I can back out. So some buyers they're just quick to just strike out that part of the contract to say, I'm waiving these conditions. So what you're saying as you're waiving that condition is to say that whatever happens, I will close this deal, whether or not I get financing from a bank. So most times they don't really understand the implication of that waiver. They just go ahead to waive it most times so the transaction can close quickly. But that's a trap. So another thing I see is another example is the home inspection waiver. Sometimes they just go ahead to waive that condition of home inspection because and it's mostly because the prices of some home comes very cheap, and once the buyer sees that the home is going for a good price, they want to rush and sign that contract and get it over with. They forget that there are risks attached to it, so they just quickly waive that clause that says, I want to inspect before I pay. And what happens in the end, as we see, is that after you have bought that property for that cheap price, you discover huge defects in the property that will cost you thousands of dollars that will not even make that purchase worth it. You understand? And I know that sometimes they are tempted to do this because they do not really want to incur the cost of engaging an inspector to inspect that property. I know it can cost hundreds of dollars, but like I advise my clients often, it's worth it to spend that money to get an inspector to determine the condition of a property before you buy it. For example, I had a client last year reach out to me to say she wanted to buy a property. When she told me the purchase price of the property, I was skeptical and I advised her to go for an inspection first. Initially, she was skeptical. She was not agreeing to do so. But after I convinced her, she reluctantly accepted. And she called me some weeks later to say she was very happy. She was like, thank you, you advised me to do this inspection. And she told me apparently that After the inspection, a lot of defects with the property were discovered, and on that reason, we had to back out of that contract. She did not have to fulfill that deposit because she put it as a condition in that contract. And she successfully backed out of that contract without any consequences. So overall, I would say involve your lawyer early enough so they can guide you and protect your interests and explain to you what these conditions mean. Another major mistake I would say I see sellers make is not talking about the defects of the property. So some sellers just believe my property has an issue, let me just get it into the market and get it out of my hands. They fail to know that the law requires them to disclose every known substantial defect in the property. Sometimes I believe they think that if I disclose the defect in this property, I will not get buyers. But by doing that, you could run into legal and financial problems lately. The buyer could sue you if they later find out that you misrepresented as to the condition of the property. So these are the two major mistakes I see people do often in transactions. So the last one will be, like you earlier said, not liaising with their bank on time. Getting financing from an institution takes a lot of time. Many people underestimate the amount of time it takes to get approval from their institution. And in the end, they run into a lot of pressure. Sometimes they are even forced to back out of deals because they do not get pre-approved by their financial institutions. So I would say these are the major three mistakes people make in transactions.
Wow. You know, there is something they call property display sheets. It's very important to always request for that when buying a property because it tells you every basically what's going on with the house.
Yes.
Some sellers wouldn't want to, but it's important for you to request for that sheet because it will tell you the how good the house is. The
That's
other
it.
thing again, when you hear the word subject to financing, subject to home inspection, she's smiling. You've already protected yourself. So in case anything is wrong with the house, because you have said subject to finance, and that's why you want to work with a knowledgeable real estate agent. There are lots of agents that want to just collect the commission. Of
Yes.
course, I want to get paid. Trust me, I know she wants to get paid. But we love it when a client go and they're happy. Guess what happened? They are retained for a very long time. We've built that relationship. And
Yes.
that is part of the reason why we are, sharing this information and educating people on this thing because these are things that people kind of like ignore, but it is really, really important. So you want to work with a knowledgeable lawyer, real estate agent, so they can protect you as you write that contract.
That's correct.
Now we go to the next question. This is becoming interesting. Do sellers have to disclose everything about their property? We just talked about it now. What happens if they don't?
Okay, I will just reiterate. By law, yes, I would say it's a big yes. By law, sellers should disclose material defects in their property. I talked about the inspection earlier. Even when an inspector comes to inspect a building, there are some things that only the seller knows about that property that even the inspection will not reveal. So the law expects the seller to reveal those things to the buyer. If the buyer still wants to buy the house despite those defects, that's fine. And I've had situations sometimes where the seller tells the buyer about some defects, and in the end, they negotiate for the price. Maybe the buyer is saying, okay, now that you have told me about this, would you mind taking off 50K or 20K off the purchase price? And I've seen that work oftentimes. On the other hand, I've had some sellers just conceal everything, and in the end, it just blows up in their face. So overall, it's good that they lay all the cards on the table. The seller must disclose every defect in the property so that the buyer is aware of the condition to avoid future legal disputes
Action.
and even financial consequences.
Thank you. So we've heard it. Property display. is very, very important. We need to know the condition of a house before we buy it, so we
That's
don't walk
correct.
into a wrong house. So, my next question: what happens during closing process from a legal perspective? I know we've talked about it earlier when you talked about the steps,
Yeah.
but we only talked about the steps. So now, what happens on the closing process?
Okay, so basically, the closing the deal is where the lawyer comes in after the buyer must have signed the contract. So the closing process is basically about the lawyer trying to get the funds from the, like I said, majority of our cases are instances where buyers get funding from the bank, unless you are very very rich and you want to pay from out of pocket. So it's basically how the lawyer coordinates with the bank to get the money to the seller on the closing date. Because, mind you, it is crucial to get that money across to the seller on the closing date. Because if that is not done, interest begins to accrue. Because for every day that you make the seller take that house away from other buyers and put it in your care, you have to pay. So that is the reason for the interest. So the lawyer has to ensure at this point that there's nothing stopping the funds from getting to the seller on the closing date. Like I said, this is where the lawyer prepares the documents that are necessary to close the transaction. I would invite my clients to the office to sign. One thing I actually in practice do here is that when I intake my clients for the first time, I explain the whole process to them. You know, sometimes this process looks so cumbersome and so stressful to them. So I take the duty to try to calm them down and tell them everything will be fine. I know there's a lot of pressure that comes with closing. So I explain the process to them to make sure it is stress-free for them and it is smooth. So this is where I also tell them about the several obligations the law requires of them, like the land transfer tax and the title insurance, as well as the safe fire insurance or the homeowner's insurance. These are all steps they need to do to successfully close that transaction. So I ensure they put all this in place. I also ensure I have done all the due diligence and all the title searches. Then on the closing day, funds are exchanged. I send the funds through check to the seller and they release the key to my client and they move into their new home. So basically, that's all what happens around the closing date. The funds get transferred. The buyer puts all their documentation in place. They sign. There's a lot of signing that goes on during closing. Sometimes my clients get overwhelmed, but I try to explain that this is necessary and this needs to be done. So yeah, I think that's pretty much what happens during the closing.
Don't forget, buying a house is a contract. Selling a house is also a contract. So, what happens in contract? Lots of signing, lots of documentation.
Lots of it.
So, lots of clauses needs to be explained. So, it's always ideal to buy without working with emotion. Because sometimes when you work with emotion, you rush things, you work under pressure, and when you work under pressure, sometimes you don't see certain errors or mistakes. So she's so right when she say, "Oh, I have to make them calm down, so they can
Yes.
be able to hear and see what is actually going on in front of them." So thank you. Now, while you were talking, you mentioned title, and that brings me to my next question. Now, my next question goes like this: what is a title and why is it important?
Okay, so basically, a title means your legal right to own a property. You know, when you own a property, it's just not you saying I live here or I own this house. Title is your legal right under the law to own that property. It is simply your right to use the property the way you want and to sell the property and to own the property. So it's your legal right. This is important for you to know because it protects you from, it gives you that right, it gives you that protection from any other person that wants to claim title to that property. So that's basically what title entails.
Thank you. Now, how can someone verify a property has a clean title?
Okay, so basically, this is part of what the lawyer does. This is what I do when I close deals for my clients. The first thing I go ahead to do is to conduct a due diligence search. So this is where I verify the title of the seller. In as much as the seller has stated in the contract that, hey, I have a good title, it's my duty as the lawyer to still go ahead to do a due diligence search as the Land Titles Registry in Manitoba. So it's an online process, an online search where we go and check the property to make sure the seller has the right to sell, to make sure that there are no debts on the property, to make sure that there are no caveats, there are no mortgages on the property. And even when we discover that there are certain debts or mortgages on the property, we ensure that we make that transaction subject to the seller discharging those debts and those mortgages before it closes. So you are able to verify that you have a clear title. When you go into the land registry, you do a search online and you can see everything regarding that property.
My question, although it's not part of the questions that I have,
Mhm.
just as a result of what you just said now, let's say the previous owner has some bills on that property.
Yes.
Does this also review all that prior transferring of property to the new seller?
Okay, so part of what we do during the closing is that there are different kinds of debt. If, for instance, now Obaro, I owe you $10,000 and I'm not agreeing to pay, you can go to the Land Titles Registry and register your debt on my property without me even knowing. So it is at the point I want to sell my property, I get to see that, oh, I can't sell. Somebody registered a debt on my property. That's what we call a lien. So that's why it's crucial for the buyer's lawyer to always see, because there are debt that even the seller is not aware of. So that's when the buyer gets to see that there's a $10,000 debt by one Elizabeth on your property. And we'll make it a condition for the seller to deal with that debt before we buy the property. On the other hand, there are also things like property taxes and in terms of the land. But this is not done through the title search. This is called the property tax search. So it is done through another means. We go in and check whether the seller has been paying their property taxes, whether they are owing the government, and we ensure that they take care of all those taxes before we buy that property.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. What is title insurance, and is it also necessary?
Oh, yes, I would say a big yes. So, title insurance, there are different kinds of insurance. So,
Yes.
title insurance is simply an insurance that protects the owner of a property from losses or any issues regarding his title to that property. You will recall I said earlier that title is your legal right to own that property, it's not just the physical thing. So title insurance is simply just protecting you from anybody that is trying to challenge your title, anybody that is trying to say, hey, this property also belongs to me. So during the closing process, the lawyer helps the buyer get the title insurance to ensure that they are protected from anybody that tries to claim the property after they have bought it. So usually title insurance covered for emergencies such as existing liens, like the one you talked about. If, for instance, after a buyer has bought a property and they discover that there are some, say, property taxes, water bills, which I see happen often on the property, which did not show up as of when the deal closes, the seller might decide to say, I'm not aware of this, and it now falls on the buyer to handle it. That is where the title insurance comes in to pay for that cost, as far as it is justified. So, and another instance is claim from previous owner. For example, a previous owner dies, and say the seller dies, and his child comes up from nowhere to say, my father gave me this property as an inheritance. I don't know how he sold it to you. This is where title insurance comes in to protect your interest. Definitely somebody is challenging your title, you have to go to court. So by title insurance, they help you pay for the cost of legal fees, and they help you just cover any costs that is associated with anybody or anything that tries to contest with your title. Title insurance is very important. It's like a one-time fee that the buyer pays to protect their interest, and I would say to give them peace of mind overall.
Thank you. So now we talked about title and we talk about title insurance. So there are two different things
Different,
to
yes,
understand. There is title, there is title insurance. There
yes,
are other type of insurance. There is home insurance as well too. But
yes,
everything has its own insurance
yes,
and they have its own function as
that's
far
it.
as that particular thing is concerned. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah.
Now, What are the most common legal disputes in real estate and how are they resolved?
Okay, off of my head and from experience, I would say the first common one is misrepresentation and failure to disclose. I know I've said it before. This happens when a seller does not disclose a known issue with the property. And a common one is water damage to basement, to the foundation of the property. Maybe there's a crack in the basement, there's a leak that only the seller knows about. Most times they just decide to conceal it so they can quickly sell the property. I've had a situation where my client closed the transaction, and the next week they were calling me to say their basement is flooded. So yes, the client was very distressed. So in situations like this, it's the seller definitely knew about it because a flooded basement doesn't just happen overnight. It must have been happening before, and the seller knowingly concealed it. So cases like this where the buyer discovers, say the basement is leaking, it can lead him to say, okay, I want to back out of this contract. By then the contract is already finalized. That's where the issue comes in. Then we can be talking about damages. The buyer has a right in law to say, you will compensate me for this because I have to fix it. So how most of this situation plays that we come back to the negotiation table, the lawyers and the lawyer for the buyer and the lawyer for the seller. Sometimes we succeed in negotiating a fair price for the buyer to fix the situation. While sometimes it gets so serious that it leads to court. Yes, it leads some of the clients to go to court. And like you asked, how are they usually resolved? For the simple ones that can be negotiated, is usually through negotiation. Maybe the person is offsetting some amount to say, okay, I'm giving you an extra 50K. I'm refunding you 50K for your troubles. While sometimes both parties are not agreeing and it goes to court. That's why it's very important for the seller to put all his cards or his or her cards on the table and come out clean about the condition of the property.
Just be honest about it.
Yes, I believe if a buyer wants to buy, they will always buy. I've had several situations where they negotiate for a lower price and it goes on. And the second issues that come in real estate transaction is breach of contract. Like I must have mentioned earlier, is where the buyer wants to back out of the contract without any reason. So if the buyer does not secure financing from the bank and they had earlier waived that condition to financing, they cannot just come and say, I am not doing this contract, I am not going forward with this contract again. That's where the seller has the right to either withhold their deposit or to take them to court for damages. So these are the two basic ones I see that leads people to go to court that creates issues in transaction.
Thank you for, you know, telling us this. It's very, very important for us to know. It's important to be prepared when buying a house.
That's
And
correct.
even selling a house, meaning before you put that house in the market, make sure you have all important documentation of that property
Yes.
displayed,
Mm-hmm.
nothing hidden. Like you said, if someone will buy, they will
They will
buy.
buy,
They will not,
definitely.
they will not.
Mm-hmm.
So hiding something is like you're lying, you know, it doesn't make that thing look good.
Yes. And there are
It brings,
consequences.
there are consequences, it brings lots of red flags.
Yes.
Now, my next question, what should people know about buying property jointly with family and friends? What should people know about buying property with family and friends? Because this one now has to do with, oh, my loved one.
Yes. Okay, this is actually an interesting question. So I would like to say that we know that title gives you the right to use a property to sell it, and it gives you a right to own it. So if you decide that you want to share those rights and privileges with someone else, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know that this is what I want to do, because it gives the person the immediate ownership just as you have it. The When it is done between husband and wife, like spouses, it is pretty straightforward. They're husband and wife, okay? But if you decide to do that with a family member or a friend, you should know that there are some risks. Like, for instance, if you buy a property with Mr. A, you should know that the same right you have is the same right Mr. A has. And you should know that sometimes they might use the property that in a way that you do not like. For instance, like I mentioned earlier, if you owe me money, I can register the debt on your property. So, for instance, if I own a property with you, you might not know that I have incurred a debt. So these are issues we see arise. So the person, you need to trust the person you are buying with. You need to know that there are risks on this kind of things that might happen. So you need to know that you are getting into such transaction knowing that this risk could occur. So I would really suggest that you consult with a lawyer to fully assess your situation before you proceed to make these kinds of decisions.
Yes, family and friends. It's always important to take away sentiments.
Yes. You
Take
need
away
to, you need to,
sentiments.
yes, you need to put your cards on the table and tell your lawyer, this is what I want to do. This is the person I intend to buy with. Is it safe? Should I proceed? The lawyer should be able to give you an honest and straightforward legal advice as to the whether you should proceed or not. Otherwise, you might run into troubles that you don't like later.
Now we are coming to the end of this podcast. For the closing, what is one key legal advice you would give to anyone entering the real estate market today? What key advice are you going to give our listeners, our viewers, as they proceed into real estate?
Okay, I would say to wrap this up, the key legal advice would be to fully understand the process. Understand your purchase contract before you sign. And I say this because every other thing comes under understanding the contract before you sign. The mistakes that can occur, one thing you must first be mindful of is that an offer to purchase contract is like every other contract you sign. Don't be deceived by because it's usually about 5 to 8 pages. Don't be deceived by the fact that it's light and it's paper. It carries the same legal weight as every other contract out there. So you must first know that this is a contract, and once I sign it, it is binding on me. And because closing a real estate deal comes with a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress and pressure, mistakes can happen. And these mistakes have significant financial and legal consequences. So that is why I would advise that you fully understand the contract before you sign. And this is where I would say always engage a professional. At the stage we are trying to pick a house, you must engage a professional realtor. This is where Elizabeth, my host, comes in. And at the stage where you've secured the financing, engage a lawyer even early enough. You could just engage a lawyer even way early enough to guide you every step of the way, because the lawyer will be always there to protect your interest. The lawyer will be always there to explain these clauses to you that you do not understand, to make sure that you do not make those mistakes that will cost you thousands of dollars in the future, or even legal battles you are not ready for. So go through that contract before you sign. Be sure before you sign it is a serious business. Know what you're doing. Understand your obligations as a seller. Know that you have to disclose everything, and as a buyer, you have to be honest as well. So that is my key takeaway advice.
Thank you. Now, I know you did an introduction earlier, but now we have people who already joined. They would like to connect with you. So would like you to also redo your introduction again. Tell us about yourself, your contact details, how they can reach you.
Okay.
So, yeah, before we wrap up the podcast for today.
Okay, so for those of our listeners that would like to reach out to me, I know some of you might have questions you are not able to say here because they might be peculiar to your situation. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer your questions. My LinkedIn handle is Obaro Efetobore, is OBARO EFETOBORE. And also my email address is hannahlegal5@gmail.com. It's Hannah, HANNA, legal number 5@gmail.com. I'm a real estate lawyer here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I can close your real estate transactions in any part of Manitoba. I am always here to give you that legal advice to make sure that your real estate closings are smooth and are on time, taking that pressure off you and making sure everything is done legally and in the right way.
Thank you. And for me, I am your host. This is Property Pulse. My name is Udodiri Elizabeth Anyaka. I am your real estate. I'm a real estate agent with Keller Williams. So, of course, we have a real estate lawyer. I'm a real estate agent. If you need a realtor, because you definitely need one when doing those transactions, those deals. So, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for, being part of the podcast tonight. So this is what we call it a day. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.